Pyrites. Crystals of iron pyrites, pyrite native iron disulfide, are sometimes used as amulets by the North American Indians, and the belief in their magic power is attested by their presence in the outfit of miscellaneous objects which the medicine men use in the course of their incantations. Because these gleaming yellow crystals are occasionally mistaken for gold, the name fool's gold has been popularly bestowed upon them. Of this material, the ancient Mexicans made wonderful mirrors, one side being usually polished flat, while the other side was strongly convex. Frequently this side was curiously carved with some symbolic representation, as appears in the case of a pyrite mirror of the Pinard collection in the Trocadero, Paris. Rock crystal. The popular belief in his time as to the origin of rock crystal is voiced by St. Jerome when, using the words of Pliny, although not citing his authority, he says that it was formed by the congelation of water in dark caverns of the mountains, where the temperature was intensely cold, so that, while a stone to the touch, it seems like water to the eye. This belief was evidently due to the fact that rock crystal was so often found in mountain clefts and caverns. Symbolically, it signified that those within the portals of the church should keep themselves free from stain and have a pure faith. The Chinese Emperor Wu was devoted to the service of the gods and of the immortal spirits. He built many edifices for religious purposes, and all the doors of these buildings were made of white rock crystal, so that a flood of light poured into the interior. Although the Chinese texts call this material rock crystal, it is possible that the name was applied to glass when that substance was but recently introduced into China. Regarding this same rock crystal, a humorous tale is related. Muan Fen, a mandarin who had a great terror of draughts, was once received in the palace by one of the Chinese emperors. The doors of the audience chamber were of rock crystal and were tightly closed, but because of the transparency of the material they seemed to be wide open, and the emperor was greatly amused to note that Muan Fen was shivering with cold, although the temperature of the room was quite comfortable. An exceptionally fine specimen of Aztec work is a skull carved out of rock crystal. It weighs 475 1/4 ounces troy and measures 8 1/4 inches in width. Ruby. The ruby has many names in Sanskrit, some of them clearly showing that it was more valued as a gem by the Hindus than any other. For instance, it is called Ratnaraj, king of precious stones, and Ratnanayaka, leader of precious stones. Another name applied to a particular shade of ruby is Padmaraga, red as the lotus. The glowing hue of the ruby suggested the idea that an inextinguishable flame burned in the stone. From this fancy came the assertion that the inner fire could not be hidden, as it would shine through the clothing or through any material that might be wrapped around the stone. If cast into the water, the ruby communicated its heat to the liquid, causing it to boil. The dark and the star rubies were called male stones, the others, more especially however those of lighter hue, being considered as female stones. All varieties served to preserve the bodily and mental health of the wearer, for they removed evil thoughts, controlled amorous desires, dissipated pestilential vapors, and reconciled disputes. In the Lapidaire of Philippe de Valois, it is said that the books tell us the beautiful, clear, and fine ruby is the lord of stones. It is the gem of gems and surpasses all other precious stones in virtue. In the time of Marbodus, end of the 11th century A.D., the same proud place was assigned to the sapphire. The ruby is spoken of in similar terms in the Lapidaire en vers, where it is called the most precious of the 12 stones God created when he created all creatures. By Christ's command, the ruby was placed on Aaron's neck. The ruby, called the Lord of Gems, the highly prized, the dearly loved ruby, so fair with its gay color. As with diamonds, rubies also were divided by the Hindus into 4 castes. The true Oriental ruby was a Brahmin, the rubicelle, a Kshatriya, the spinel, a Vaisya, and lastly, the Balas ruby, a Sudra. The possession of a Padmaraga, or Brahmin ruby, conferred perfect safety upon the owner, and as long as he owned this precious stone, he could dwell without fear in the midst of enemies and was shielded from adverse fortune. However, great care had to be taken to preserve this ruby of the first class from contact with inferior specimens, as its virtue would thereby be contaminated, and its power for good correspondingly diminished. The many talismanic virtues of the ruby are noted in the 14th century treatise attributed to Sir John Mandeville. Here, the fortunate owner of a brilliant ruby is assured that he will live in peace and concord with all men, that neither his land nor his rank will be taken from him, and that he will be preserved from all perils. The stone would also guard his house, his fruit trees, and his vineyards from injury by tempests. All the good effects were most surely secured if the ruby, set in ring, bracelet, or brooch, were worn on the left side. The gorgeous ruby, the favorite gem of Burma, where the finest specimens are found, is not only valued for its beauty, but is also believed to confer invulnerability. To attain this end, however, it is not thought to be sufficient to wear these stones in a ring or other piece of jewelry, but the stone must be inserted in the flesh and thus become, so to speak, a part of its owner's body. Those who in this way bear about with them a ruby confidently believe that they cannot be wounded by spear, sword, or gun. As it is often remarked that the most daring and reckless soldiers pass unscathed through all the perils of war, we can understand that this superstition may sometimes appear to be verified. Sapphire. The sapphire is noted as a regal gem by Damigeron, who asserts that kings wore it about their necks as a powerful defense from harm. The stone preserved the wearer from envy and attracted divine favor. For royal use, sapphires were set in bracelets and necklaces, and the sacred character of the stone was attested by the tradition that the law given to Moses on the Mount was engraved on tablets of sapphire. While we should probably translate here lapis lazuli instead of sapphire, all such passages were later understood as referring to the true sapphire, which is not found in pieces of the requisite size. In the 12th century, the Bishop of Rennes lavishes encomiums upon this beautiful stone. It is quite natural that this writer should lay especial stress upon the use of the sapphire for the adornment of rings, for it was in his time that it was beginning to be regarded as the stone most appropriate for ecclesiastical rings. The sapphire was like the pure sky, and mighty nature had endowed it with so great a power that it might be called sacred and the gem of gems. Fraud was banished from its presence, and necromancers honored it more than any other stone, for it enabled them to hear and to understand the obscurest oracles. The traditional virtue of the sapphire as an antidote against poison is noted by Bartholomeus Anglicus, who claims to have seen a test of its power, somewhat similar to that recorded by Ahmed Tefashi of the Emerald. In John of Trevisa's version, this passage reads as follows: "His virtue is contrary to venom, and quencheth it every deal. And if you put an attercop in a box, and hold a very sapphire of Indi at the mouth of the box only while, by virtue thereof, the attercop is overcome, and dieth as it were suddenly, as Diasc saith, pseudo Dioscorides. And this same I have essayed oft in many and diverse places. His virtue keepeth and saith the sight, and cleareth even of filth without only grief." Voicing the general belief that the sapphire was endowed with power to influence spirits, Bartolomeus says that this stone was a great favorite with those who practiced necromancy. And he adds, Also witches love well this stone, for they ween that they may work certain wonders by virtue of this stone. There was in the South Kensington Museum in London a splendid sapphire of a peculiar tint. In the daylight it shows a beautiful rich blue color, while by artificial light it has a violet hue and resembles an amethyst. In the 18th century this stone was in the collection of Count de Walicki, a Polish nobleman, and Madame de Genlis used it as the theme of one of her stories, entitled Le Saphir Merveilleux. Here the sapphire is used as a test of female virtue, the change of color indicating unfaithfulness on the part of the wearer. If the owner of the stone wished to prove that the subject of the test was innocent, she was made to wear the sapphire for 3 hours of daylight. But in the opposite case, the test was so timed that it began in daylight and ended when the candles or lamps had been lighted. This sapphire, still known as the Saphir Merveilleux, was for a time in the collection of the Duke of Orleans, who bore the name of Philippe Égalité during the French Revolution. The star sapphire is that variety of sapphire in which, when the stone is cut and rounded off horizontal with the dome of the crystal, the light is condensed across the 3 lines of crystalline interference. 3 cross lines produce a star, which moves as a source of light, or as it is moved from the source of light. Star sapphires very rarely possess the deep blue color of the fine blue sapphire. Generally the color is somewhat impure, or of a milky blue, or else a blue-gray, or sometimes almost a pure white. The blue-gray, gray, and white stones frequently show a much more distinct star, possibly from the fact that there are more inclusions between the layers of the crystals than with the darker blue stones, as it is the set of interference bands that produces the peculiar light. Just as the eye agate was used in some countries to preserve against the evil eye, so the moving star is believed by the Cingalese to serve as a protection and a guard against witchcraft of all kinds. The great Oriental traveler, Sir Richard Francis Burton, had a large star sapphire, or asteria as it was called. He referred to it as his talisman, for it always brought him good horses and prompt attention wherever he went. In fact, it was only in those places where he received proper attention that he would show it to the natives, a favor they greatly appreciated because the sight of the stone was believed to bring good luck. The fame of Burton's asteria traveled ahead of him, and it served him well as a guiding star. De Boot, writing in the 17th century, states that such a stone was called Siegstein, victory stone, among the Germans. The remarkable asteria, known as the Star of India in the Morgan Tiffany collection in the American Museum of Natural History, has a more or less indefinite historic record of some 3 centuries, but after its many wanderings, it has now found a worthy resting place in the great museum. Its weight is 543 carats. The asteria, or star sapphire, might be called a stone of destiny, as the 3 crossbars which traverse it are believed to represent faith, hope, and destiny. As the stone is moved, or the light changes, a living star appears. As a guiding gem, warding off ill omen and the evil eye, the star sapphire is worn for the same reasons as were the oculus mundi and the oculus belli. One of the most unique of talismanic stones, it is said to be so potent that it continues to exercise its good influence over the first wearer even when it has passed into other hands. Sard. The sard was regarded as a protection against incantations and sorcery, and was believed to sharpen the wits of the wearer, rendering him fearless, victorious, and happy. The red hue of this stone was supposed to neutralize the malign influence of the dark onyx, driving away the bad dreams caused by the latter and dispelling the melancholy thoughts it inspired. Serpentine. The Italian peasants of today believe that pebbles of green serpentine afford protection from the bites of venomous creatures. These stones are usually green with streaks or veins of white, and the name was derived from their fancied resemblance to a serpent's skin. In addition to their prophylactic powers, if anyone has been bitten by such a creature, the stone, when applied to the wound, is supposed to draw out the poison. Here, as in the case of coral, the hand of man must not have shaped the amulet. It should be in its natural state. As a general rule, however, the belief that the touch of any iron instrument, such as the tool of the gem cutter, destroys the magic efficacy of the substance is less firmly held in regard to stones than in reference to coral.